Welcome to another episode of Creative Leaders Unplugged. I'm Morgan with Arne, and today we're talking to Alan Moore. Alan is an author, an artist, a musician, a dancer, a storyteller,
Yeah.
and his passion lies in discussing beauty.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating that also the way, you just said it, discussing beauty, your mind goes to, oh, beauty, that's nice, that's cute, that's beautiful, that's such a that's not it. It's way more,
Much more.
much more, it's deeper and profound. And if you think about it, regenerative is actually
Yes.
what it comes down to. When something's beautiful, it's regenerative.
hmm
that
hmm
that was so that's something I'm going to take away from the conversation. Like when it's not beautiful, it's not regenerative. And so how can you make it more beautiful?
Yeah. And that it's life-giving. Beauty is life-giving
Yeah.
as well. And of course, Alan explains it much more gracefully than either of us can.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of, but the
Sorry, I had
biggest,
to laugh because I really like yeah, yeah, because some people can just they speak, they can talk, they
Mhm.
like they have language that I don't possess. And and yeah, stories and I don't know, sentences, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
terminology, the
Terminology.
and the ideas behind it, right? Like he explained beauty as a layer cake, where aesthetics is only a very small piece or a small
Yeah.
layer of that. And of course, there can be a beautiful person, which could describe their soul, right? Not just their appearances, but it could describe, oh, that person, they're so beautiful, like inside. But he dives into what it really means and also why it's important to do beautiful business. And
Making the world a better place.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I, this podcast obviously is searching for, creative leadership. The, what does it mean?
hmm
What are those people? What do they do? And in that sense, he is one of those examples. Not someone. So you can't copy. You can't be Alan Moore, right?
Sorry, that
Yeah,
position's filled.
it's
Yes.
filled, but you can't. But because he's a unique person with a unique
hmm
story, like we all are, everyone. So, and he's one of those people that are clearly unique, but gives you the permission because he
hmm
shows you another option, another way of thinking, another way of speaking, and and just by saying I want to make the world a better place, giving you the permission to also want to do that instead of feeling like who am I, because it can sound somewhat arrogant. But if we don't, I mean, because that's basically how you design the future, by consciously
hmm
recognizing that that's what we do. Even if you think you're not doing it, you're doing it anyway. So rather than just letting things go and just taking it for granted,
Yeah.
recognize the fact that we are designing the future anyway. So better do a good job. And so I don't know. I like that. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's very overwhelming to think, okay, how am I going to design the future? Right? And especially he talks about how we're kind of living in a bit of a dystopian age.
Hmm.
Things feel very overwhelming, lots of wars, lots of floods.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you can also think maybe more locally, how can I design my future?
Yeah. It
And
starts with you. It
it
starts with
starts with
one
me.
person. And
Am I the kind of person that makes my bed every day? I don't know. Do I want to be that person? Yes, I am this person. But it's these little things.
are you?
That's
Are you that
I
person?
I am this person who makes my bed every day.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
Why? Because you're gonna make a mess of it anyway,
But it's
right?
so nice to walk into my room and it's just made from and it's waiting to
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
In my I don't have so much storage space in my apartment. So in the other rooms, I have boxes and bookshelves and tools and golf clubs. But then in my bedroom, it's just my bed.
Hi.
And that's very calming. So I'm like, okay, I can also make my bed and
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
So, well,
Fun
I'm
facts
not sure how
nobody
that's going to
asked
make
for.
the. Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, how does that make the world a better place? But no, but it does because it starts with you. It starts with
Hmm.
there's only there's only really one kind of change. It's personal change
Mm-hmm.
because that's how you change the things you do by you changing, and that means
Yeah,
other people can change because you're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. It's not you don't change the world by changing other people because you can't. They can
sadly
all
not. I've
no.
tried.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, but it's you can only change yourself. So
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
give people options and you can be an example, and then
Hmm.
people go like, oh, that's possible too, and that's how you could say you change other people, but actually they change themselves. Like you can change yourself.
Hmm.
And that's all, that's both, I think, the only way and also the hardest way, because it's so much easier to point fingers at other people going, they should change, they should do something different. And it's not, it's you should change
Yeah.
and be an example. And that will change other people probably, but it's by allowing them and giving them options and giving them permission and giving them examples.
Hmm.
That's the way. So, I'm not saying I'm going to make my bed every night now,
It might
but
be something different
you
for
did
you.
give me, you did give me sort of an option where you're like, oh, okay, that's possible.
That is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, enjoy this episode. I hope you guys take away, yeah, a new way of thinking about beauty and a bit of a perspective shift, which Alan also shares.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Okay. Enjoy.
I a person that has always been obsessed by how we can make the world a better place. In my past, someone that would have loved to have spent a lot of time on the dance floor. Not so much these days, but as a younger man, definitely dance and music. I was a musician. I've worked as an artist, and I still think that creativity is something which we all possess in a whole variety of different ways, where we can contribute in very small ways and very big ways to making the world a better place than the one that we currently have. So that's off the cuff a little bit about how I feel about the world.
So when did you start? So and it does resonate, but I'm curious, when was the moment that you really said to yourself, I want to make the world a better place? Where does that, because as a kid, I mean, maybe, but you probably don't have that kind of understanding of the world as a whole. Like this is going to be something I'm going to improve upon. But when does that happen where you go like, yeah, that's what I really want?
yeah, I
I
guess.
think I think it is a good question. I think that I don't think there's a single moment, but I think there's a process of osmosis.
Mm.
So I think that growing up in the house that I did, my, my parents always cooked from scratch. So we sat down to a family meal every day. There was a lot of music in our house. There were a lot of people coming and going. There were parties that we had. And I couldn't kind of really, I wasn't as a kid kind of marking that down as this is a better place. But in a sense, my parents were making the world a better place just literally by the cultural practice of being who they were. And we had a lot of fun on not a lot of money, I would say. I think music when I was growing up, so I'm 60. So in the 80s, music had a very particular cultural and political charge to it, which is a bit different to the world that we're in today. And I'm not saying that musicians today aren't commenting on those things or whatever,
Mm, yeah.
but it was something that you felt an energy to. So there was a lot of commentary about the world that we were living in politically. And I think that I seem to be politically aware and sensitive to what was happening in our world, not just in the UK, but a little bit further afield as well. And I used to sort of dwell on those things. And actually, I would ask the question of why would you choose to go and do some very bad things to people, rockets, missiles, whatever, because that's very destructive. I had a friend of my father's, and I could have only been a 10-year-old boy who had gone to Poland, and he had been taken to Auschwitz, and he came back. And I remember my father saying, we're going to go around and see Johnny. His name was Johnny Johnson, actually. And his son was called Johnny Johnson. But there you go. But I sat there incredulous when he explained the experience that he had had. And, I was, you know, as a 10-year-old boy, I was aware of the Second World War. I was aware of the Battle of Britain. I was aware of, certain things about that narrative. So I was born in 1964. So, my parents were part of that generation that experienced the war. But I found it an incredibly profound moment as a 10-year-old boy listening to this man who shared with me a document that explained what human beings were capable of doing to other human beings at a scale that I just couldn't imagine. And I ended up actually doing a school project about the persecution of the Jews. And I remember lying in bed one night reading this. So at this point, I would have been about 14, and it goes into this very sort of detailed explanation of what happened to Jewish people in the program, whether they went to Auschwitz or Belsen or other places. And I tried to imagine, could I imagine, a single person that was lying dead on the floor in our bedroom? I could. Could I imagine two? I could. Could I imagine 10? I could. And then you try to get into the scale of thousands, and you just cannot imagine the scale of what human beings can do to other human beings at that level of destruction. And I don't know, it's always stuck with me. Then the work that needs to be done is the work that is about healing and helping to change the world for a better place, rather than actually being one where we can be so catastrophically destructive.
Isn't it easier to become sort of, I don't know, cynical and go like, it's unimaginable. How can I possibly
Yeah.
change this? So in a way, you have from that actually became actually quite courageous in that sense, saying, no, I'm gonna make the world a better place, which is in a way, because it's such a huge task, and the way you describe it as well, I actually go, oh, where do you start? Because people are awful.
Well, yeah, people are awful, but then also people are absolutely magnificent and extraordinary. And, we on a daily basis demonstrate the capacity of superhuman goodness, forgiveness, generosity, love, compassion, empathy. And at the other end of the spectrum, people have the capacity to do the most awful things that you could ever possibly imagine. And I suppose that I was compelled by the idea that creative acts, whatever they were, because creativity generally is about making the world a better place rather than one which is not so great. I don't know. We might want to debate that. Other people might think that's
I think
Well,
worldviews may differ on what is a better place, but I think, yeah,
the principle, the universal idea that one could live cheek by jowl with your fellow man in harmony, in respect, we may not share all the same worldviews, but we can do that. And it's really funny because I was thinking very deeply about what life was like, let's say 1,000 years ago, maybe even longer, when we were learning to navigate the world in ships and boats and trading and whatever. And there was a great deal of sharing, an extraordinary amount of sharing. And so when we look at the political debates we've got at the moment, where we talk about borders and sovereignty and ownership, migration, immigration, whatever, which obviously has become a very hot topic and potato in many countries around the world. I don't think there's one that's not touched by those things. The reality is that if one is prepared to look back in time, what you see is that when knowledge is shared, in a generous way. In fact, there's a book that's just come out called The Gold Roads, I think, and it was all about actually how India was played such an important role in sharing its spices and its fabrics and its artifacts and its knowledge to the rest of the world. Were we not to be more porous as a species, then that knowledge potentially could have been lost because we would have closed our borders as a consequence of that.
Mm.
And I find it interesting that finally the idea that indigenous knowledge and wisdom might not be such a bad thing is a really good thing to be embraced. But it's taken a long time for that to come around. So I hope there's going to be a bit more of that.
Yeah. And especially the stories that aren't preserved with documents or photographs or text, right? The oral traditions and the knowledge and stuff. That's really
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the number zero came from India, albeit we talk about the idea that it was the Chinese or the Arabian. We call it the Arabian numerical system. But in fact, I was just listening to a Radio 4 program this morning, and so zero is a number. It's not zero, but it completely changes the way that you can imagine the world and the
Mhm.
way that you can kind of computate it by the fact of that very simple, that digit. That was India. And of course, there are many other things. I mean, I think about there's a great book called The Dawn of Everything
I was
by a
just going to
guy.
mention this. It's so funny. I,
Yeah,
I actually looked up the title because I read it in Dutch. And I was just going to mention because you made me think of this story. Sorry, I have to cut because that was mind blowing for me. Because at the beginning
yeah,
of the book, it talks about how First Nation people from the US,
Mhm.
how, and it's you probably can explain it better than I, but how actually they influenced sort of because their way of life and the way they saw society and the way they saw sort of the way they life in general, but also how to arrange the way they lived to, and their culture that influenced the people going there, the colonizers, and they came back to Europe and they influenced the French Revolution because of
Mm.
First Nation people in the US. So to me, it was like, what? Because we started, as Europeans, started colonizing that Northern America. We encountered people with a completely different way of looking at life and society and culture that influenced those Europeans. They came back, and that again influenced the French Revolution. And although this is a podcast, but I just got a message that my camera is stuck. Anyway, so Alan, was that the thing you wanted to mention, or is there something else in there?
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a very interesting. I mean, reading that book, a profound revelation. I think that one one can view the world in a very different type of way.
Mm.
And so they talked about that there were no laws, there was no poverty, there were no fences. The idea that you were protectors or stewards of the land,
Yeah.
to me, I thought was very interesting and relevant to the world that we live in today. And that to me is where I thought that the conversation with Vengro was very important. And so they built a very different type of society, one that Europeans wanted to describe as the noble savage, but one which actually was, in fact, I think that these people, if you've hung around the planet for say 80,000 years as a, as a cultural group, I think you've kind of worked a few things out fundamental level. And I think our arrogance, which is primarily based on the concept of ownership and control, power, the and it's not to say that these things weren't part of, you know, these different, cultural indigenous institutions around the world, whether that's through South America, North America, whatever. But there was this incredible sense of respect for the land, the idea of legacy as being something that was very important, how you kind of really worked in a practice of regeneration. And that is something which is very important to the work that I do and I'm very interested in. So I think sustainability is a kind of bit of a cul-de-sac in terms of the ideas and the practices that, we could or should be, using. But this idea of re-embracing the idea of regeneration as a philosophy, as a
Yeah.
practice, not just with the land, but also with the kind of societies that we want to create or the economies that we should be creating, to me is very important, and one that I'm very kind of curious about and thinking about quite often.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's
No.
I can see that there's also a shift because of course sustainability is an important topic, right? But I can see that there's also a rise with the regenerative being applied to much more than just physical resources. And that's very exciting to think about how we
Yeah.
might apply it. Yeah.
So I've got a shorthand, which is, so you would know that, my interest is around
Mm-hmm.
beauty and design. But with beauty, I say that nature's run the longest R&D project we've ever known. And she's created the conditions for all life to thrive
Yeah.
without wasting a single atom over a very, very long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, actually, all of the physical laws that describe how nature works are said to be beautiful. In fact, Einstein was described as the poetic scientist, I think, actually, or theorist. And so there's this idea that when a physical description or is described, the more it's simplified, the more beautiful it becomes, the more true it is to actually how it describes how something is actually happening.
Did you watch the film The Beautiful Equations?
I think I must have done.
I
I
think you
think I
must
think
have
I must
done.
have done.
Yeah,
I think I must have done.
it's actually, if I'm correct, Matt Collins, because I was reading up on your work and the things you were doing, and so that really reminded me of this film. It's Matt Collins. He's an artist. I think he's an artist, and he kind of dives into this world of maths, and he speaks to people like Stephen Hawkins. And I was watching this, and this is again one of those moments where I went, "Oh, I never thought about it," because they talk about how when a equation is beautiful, it's probably right. And to me, it was like, "What are you saying? You are you
Yeah.
are you are
Yeah.
you're not emotional people. You're scientists.
No.
What are you
No.
talking about? How is beauty connected to that?"
So so beauty is not about aesthetics. Aesthetics is to me a
Mm.
very small sliver of actually something much more fundamental
Mm.
and much bigger, and it's a layer cake. And it attaches itself to us in every single possible way that you could. What I was going to say was is that so the end kind of part of the story is that nature's MO is around regeneration.
Hmm.
And so if all the laws of the universe are described to be beautiful, then that means that beauty equals regeneration. And
Mm.
if we want to hang around, as I said, for a bit longer,
Yeah.
then the playbook is actually about how do we become regenerative as opposed to how to become sustainable. Sustainability is an impossibility.
Yeah.
It's a very stressed position that we're in. And so I'm really, really interested in that concept
Yeah.
of beauty being regenerative and all the things that we can learn from that in terms of how we go forward. And, I'll be dead a very long time before perhaps those concepts will really start to sort of play a key role, I think, in the world that we live in, because we're still built on the concept of growth. We're still built on growth for growth's sake, numbers, greed, extraction, whatever. I think it's a battle royal, as we would say in English, in terms of the fight for the future of what a better world looks like. And I think that will run, it won't run over decades, it will run over hundreds of years, where you will have certain people, you know, there's one that wants to be a president of the United States of America. There's one that sits in the Kremlin. He has a bit of a point of view on how things are going. There's a guy in, Hungary. He has a bit of a point of view. We've got a whole bunch of folks here in the UK that also have a point of view in terms of how they would like to have power
Hmm.
over people. An indigenous perspective is that you use power in a very different type of way. And I'm not saying that we go back to being, tribes in woods and, and all the rest of it by any stretch of the imagination. But the conversation, and which I've learned the hard way, is that the the means to really shift people's perceptions and ideas of what is possible or what is important or what should actually be in the narrative frame.
Hmm.
So, media is extremely good at, it's like, it's not what is just in the frame of conversation and using their power of distribution to do that. It's what is excluded out of the frame, which is not having a, so you would never
Hmm.
get like a front page of, your daily newspaper, wherever you are, which is about revelation. It's recognized that indigenous cultures, wisdoms, and knowledge actually could be the future to our country's wealth, health, and prosperity. It's just not going to get there. You know,
Yeah.
there will be other people that will want to hold that frame, and but outside of that, I think as a species, as human beings, there is actually a very, very big conversation going on about who it is we would quite like to be. But it's going to take some time, I think, to get there.
That's a huge topic. It's interesting to see sort of, or to hear your story from being this kid, imagining sort of what it's like to see, dead bodies basically in your room. And you kind of imagine the horror and then I kind of like, from basically, looking at this and listening to this from afar, literally almost, that you're, you came from a family that was happy. It sounded very happy. It was right. And then you saw all the things that were wrong in the world, or the things that happened in the past. And in a way, your answer to this is, I want to make the world a better place, but by taking a very positive attitude, talking about beauty, instead of saying, well, you can, as a protest, you took the angle of, I'm going to, I think I read this somewhere, the beauty is the ultimate metric. This is sort of, to
It's what
me,
we say. It's what we say. That's the invitation and the
yeah,
provocation.
yeah. Whereas
Um,
that's a very positive approach to trying to solve these terrible or huge big problems. And I'm not saying beauty is small. I think but for a lot of people, I'll say like, that sounds very cute. That sounds
yeah.
like a very cute little thing you're doing. And I think I know.
Uh, give me 20 minutes with a person, and I will take them from the idea that beauty is cute to actually beauty is something that is really profoundly
Mm,
important and changing. And it's how you tell the story.
mm.
And that to me is very important in terms of how you do that.
Yeah, you
Um,
just did, by the way. I think you did. Actually, you already did that, and I think we are both totally convinced. But I do feel, and I haven't been in that place, but it's maybe a little bit similar towards what we were kind of coming up against as designers. Because I come from a world of design where I felt that as a designer, I wasn't really helping the world at all. I was just, getting briefs from clients
Mm-hmm.
to find this, to make whatever product or whatever crap they're trying to sell, make it look more pretty or something, and sell more of it. And
yeah,
and when I was young, I was like, oh, this is really cool, it's really nice. And after a while, I thought, wait a minute,
What am
this
I
is not.
doing?
What am I
Yeah.
doing? This is not the right place for me. I want to solve real problems. I want to kind of have real meaning and real, I want to understand how to have a positive impact on the world. But as designers, we weren't taken serious, still not, because design is, again, it's aesthetics. It's this, you make things look pretty, and so we've been always trying to sort of. It's not. I'm not saying it's a fight, but it's more. But it is a battle between sort of no, wait, it's not about that. It's actually we want to make, and I think it's has something to do with beauty, not aesthetics, but with
Mm-hmm.
beauty, because beauty to me is also having, real meaning, creating things with real meaning for real people. And if you go to
mm,
that level, all of a sudden you'll find, at least in my mind, that human beings in general, and we're not talking about the people who want to get all the power, but in general, most human beings have the same needs. We are not evil beings at all. We actually have very simple, very basic, and actually maybe very beautiful needs. And that sort of, for me, has always been a driver of going like, instead of looking at, growth or, this all these the things that you just mentioned, how can we be, how can we be taken more serious as people who have a different solution or a different angle or a different option to what's out there. So I think I think there's a whole world of creative people or who are consciously creative or designers, maybe artists or musicians. Basically, I think we're missing those people, by the way, in music that have that, the commentary on the world as it is. But I don't know, that's sort of where I'm
mm.
trying to kind of create a language around it. And I feel that in a way you have created a language around this, whereas a lot of us, and you can probably hear this, in my trying to explain it, is we're struggling to get that story. So when you're saying I have a 20-minute story, and I'll convince anyone, I think we need that story.
Well, thank you.
And one of the things that you were, when you were talking about how life is and nature is regenerative, it reminded me a lot of the principles of biomimicry. And I don't know if
Mm,
I'm sure you're familiar with biomimicry, but they have a lot of different principles. But the main one is always life creates conditions conducive for life,
mm.
which is essentially exactly what you said, right? Life is always going to do things. But because Arne was saying like the language, where we can see Arne and I can see the importance of beauty, but maybe a lot of people aren't yet there. But are there principles to beauty? Or like what you said, if it's a layer cake, aesthetics is just a small part. What else is in the layer cake?
Well, I think that So I mean, the two books that I've written around this. So there's Do Design, Why Beauty is Key to Everything, and then Do Build, How to Make and Lead a Business the World Needs. And you could say, well, so it's complicated, but we don't need to make it, or it's complex, but we don't need to make it complicated. And the reality is we are very complex machines as human beings, albeit that the world that we inhabit or the world that speaks to us is almost like we aren't actually being met as this complicated machine that we are, or this organism maybe is a better word in many respects. So I talk about the holy trinity of the hand, the heart, and the mind, and these things operate all at the same time. And when I was quite broken, which I'm very happy to talk about, but it was a part of how I ended up writing about beauty. I kind of realized that I'd ignored my soul for so long that, it was a
Can we
bit,
talk about this? I would love to
it,
hear this
it
story.
was, it was a bit of a desert. And, and I kind of realized that, albeit, I'd taken a garden, which was 2 acres when I was a very young man, which was completely derelict, and over 30 years turned it into a very beautiful landscaped garden, productive garden, which means then that we were growing vegetables at some scale, as well as fruit and all the rest of it, as well as planting flowers and blah, blah, blah. But even in doing that, I hadn't really addressed the soulful part of who I was as a person. I think I'd been so focused about making things in the outside world that I wasn't really looking at what was going on in my interior space. I came from a family which my dad was atheist. I think my mum was agnostic, but I always actually had a kind of big spiritual need, and I don't know why that was. And there wasn't really kind of anything within my kind of orbit where you would be fed anything that felt spiritual other than music, actually. So music for me was my kind of soul food in a way. A track, a lyric, whatever, somehow or other you were able to transcend from where
Mm.
you were into a very different place, whatever that was. And so I realized that if I wasn't really addressing what was going on inside me, then I was really ignoring the most important calling that I had. And it was actually through that I ended up writing about beauty, which, as I describe as my homecoming, or one's homecoming,
Mm.
our homecoming. How do you come home? And the idea that, so the story is that I'm really thinking about how do I come home and what is home to me. And I end up at a memory which had never come to me before of being a 7-year-old boy on a family holiday on a beach in Cornwall. And my mum was always a very anxious woman. That was for many, many reasons. But when she got anxious, I got anxious. She could be quite controlling. And yet where we were on this beach, and she's in a knitted jumper, she's in a skirt, she's got, bare legs, nothing on her feet, and she's really joyful. And it's wonderful to watch. And it's kind of weirding me out at the same time because that's like not how mum was. I thought about my father, who was wartime educated, so he left school at 14 during the Second World War, and he never earned a lot of money in his life, but he always worked with his hands, and he had an incredible emotional intelligence I reflected on. And I would say you could never put a Rizzler paper between my mother and my father. So, if you're going to roll a cigarette, that's the Rizzler paper. So, It's a very thin piece of paper. And I thought about my brother and my sister, who I loved unconditionally, and myself. And I thought, I'm at one with those I love the most. I'm at one with myself, and I hadn't always been at one with myself. And then I thought, and I'm at one with the natural world. We're on this amazing beach. We seem to be the only family on it. Maybe that's the fiction of my imagination, but the sky is blue. The water is twinkling with diamonds as the sun is, shining on it. And this incredible sense of homecoming of what was inside of me, because actually our interior space is as vast as the cosmos. That's the reality. Just don't go there when you've got a hangover, because it's not a good place to be. It's always better to externalize at that point. But that incredible sense of homecoming, the only word that I could describe was beauty, and that's how I ended up writing about beauty as something I thought as absolutely something fundamental to me. And so the way that I approached the writing of that book, I mean, I talk about it now because I can rationalize it.
Mhm.
I think when I wrote it, there was no rationalization. It was just, I just need to come home and I just need to write about all the things that are really important to me. But essentially, I was writing about what does it mean to be someone that exists in this world, to ask questions, to be creative, to be a maker. What does it mean to come home to, I mean, when we had the other house that we lived in, we had very little light around us. So I could go stand out in our 2 acre garden and I could just see the stars, in all their glory, smoking a cigarette and, wondering at the majesty of what I was looking at. And every night you would go out, the whole, canvas has shifted because obviously, the earth is moving, and everything else, which I thought was actually pretty amazing. So that reconnection to who we are within this incredible cosmos that we've got, the reconnection to our responsibility of curators and stewards of the world that we live in, whether that's, a society, a community, the economics, planetary health, whatever. And I thought, how can you do that in a way that would be really easy for someone to understand
Mm.
and comprehend without writing 900 pages of something, to try and make it a little bit more poetic in the way that you would describe it. And so that was what I attempted to do. I've written a number of books before that. One was, we were up at 180,000 words and, we got it down to 90,
Oh.
which is still out there somewhere, I think.
Waiting to come
But
home.
well, I don't know. It did its job, but I think if I'd not written that book, I wouldn't have thought about what is a really different way to engage people with some really fundamental ideas.
Mhm.
Maybe on paper would look very disparate and very strange and unusual, companions together. But actually, it is about trying to find the harmony or the reconnection between those things, which is actually what makes us as amazing human beings on this planet. And I think that in my journey, in my lifetime, in my experience of all the things that I've done, all of those things need to be reconnected together. And I thought very deeply about teaching,
Mm.
which was, we need to be able to find a way. It's really easy to slice things up into very
Yeah.
simple slices, right?
Yeah.
So we're going
Yeah.
to learn about this, we're going to learn about that. And it's like, but actually what we're not doing is we're not creating the connectivity or the interrelationship between actually how these things work.
Hmm.
And to me, that story about beauty and the way of introducing people to it and where they could go with it, which is multifaceted in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very important that people feel that sense of that connectivity and that communication and that interrelationship, which I think very few do in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of partly sort of, the work that we do, or the writing around beauty has come about, that it's so important to, what it is that we're doing.
Yeah. And you said, of course, that this came from a time, when you were broken and you're starting to think about all of these things, like, what do I need? What are the things that are important to me? It kind of
Mm-hmm.
coalesces into this simple, not simple, but refined and elegant thing about beauty, right? And I think people appreciate beauty, but I don't know if a lot of people think that beauty is a necessity. And so, like, when you share these ideas with other people, what are some of the biggest either not misconceptions, could be misconceptions, or like, what ways are you hoping to transform a lot of people when it comes to thinking about beauty?
I think that it's been quite funny actually on this journey, in that there's rarely been hostility to what it is that I'm going to do. I mean, there was one time I did an event for a very big company in Portugal,
Mhm.
and we had an event, a dinner the night before. And this gentleman comes up to me and he says, "I hear you're going to be running the day with us tomorrow. So what's it all going to be about?" And I said, "Well, it's going to be about how we're going to make your business more beautiful." And you could see by the look on his face, he wasn't particularly impressed. He wasn't particularly impressed by this concept. But in terms of my life, by German you say my Lebenslaufen. So my life's run. I've been in a lot of places, and I'm pretty okay with all of it. And in a sense, he kind of inspired me to even kind of be better than I thought, maybe we could do. Anyway, so I did this day for their 70 divisional heads of this global company, and at the end of it, we finished up. I was sitting down in the restaurant, and I was having some food, and this guy came up to me and he said, you know, "Can I sit with you?" And I said, "Please be my guest." And he said, "Well, I'd like to apologize." And I said, "Well, what for?" He said, "Well, to be honest, I really didn't believe that actually you could really help us with the business of what we're doing. But," he said, "I have to say that you've really changed the way that I think about myself and the work that we do. And for that, I want to thank you." And I said, "Well, you're welcome." And I think that there's just there's just a way where you, as I said, you can maybe what I sometimes call a noble conspiracy, where you conspire against those you love the most when they don't want to choose to believe what it is you're doing. And actually, I think the work is to really speak to the soul of every single person that you're working with. You don't talk about that. That's not what you say you're going to do, but that's where you kind of go to. Because if you can't shift hearts, you can't shift minds and
Exactly.
perceptions,
Mm.
and it has to be a heart shift.
Yeah.
And so I've learned that not everyone wants to sit in a woo-woo circle and feel the love of brother man and all the rest of it. We've got all sorts of things going on, and I don't mean to be trite, but this is the conspiracy in that sense, because you can bring all sorts of other things in. If you can open up people's perceptions of themselves
Yeah.
and their possibilities and the potential of what they can be, then you can turn them or help them evolve into agents of change, which is something really different. And to me, that is something fundamentally different to saying we're going to be working on SDGs 1, 7, and 9, or whatever. It's like, no, we're going to be working on how we get you to think about your business and yourself and the work that you do to be more beautiful, and what you can lay out in a simple way, a story of actually how all of that interconnects into everything that is absolutely relevant to the way that we lead our days, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, how we think about legacy, how we think about how we design stuff, how we then get into where do we take the materials that we make products with, how do we manufacture them, how do we deal with waste, what are the economics that kind of relate to that. So it's a kind of scalable kind of concept. And in actually Do Build, we have in the back of the book an appendix of 50 businesses I thought were beautiful. Of course, no one ever gets to 100%. It's not like that, but it's like the intention is there. We have a one man, a ceramicist, a guy called Florian Gadsby, who produces, as far as I'm concerned, some of the most sublime ceramics. But it relates to the idea that, William Morris said, have nothing in your house you believe to be neither useful nor beautiful. And then we also have a country, which is actually New Zealand, because they have a policy around well-being. And if you have a policy around well-being, then you have a KPI and you have expenditure and you have attention to actually what are the things we need to do if we're going to make the entire population of New Zealand feel better, about themselves. We don't have in England a KPI around well-being, right? And I think so that discussion then about scale is also is critical. So what depresses me when I see certain events going on, which is this event is all about, the unicorns, the scalers, the business, the kind of whatever. But actually then all I know is that's like, how much money can we make? How fast can we make it? And how fast can we exit as a consequence of that? But they're actually not really asking the question, which is actually, does it matter to the world, the work that we are doing? Are we transformative? Are we regenerative? Are we actually giving back something that is going to create legacy for the work we do? Because the principal MO for the vast majority of organizations and businesses is the complete opposite, as I said.
Yeah.
How much, how fast, how quick, and can we exit that?
That's what we've been taught at school when you do an MBA, when you go, when a successful business or a successful person grows forever, apparently. Right. And it makes no sense if you think about it, but this is what you are. And also, so organizations, cultures, these systems, they reward that behavior. And if you are trying to kind of create some kind of intervention, or you want to, if people behave differently, you're going to be punished for it. So I work with a lot of companies where I feel that people are very anxious, very scared, even though they know, they'll know you're right. They'll know they won't disagree with you, but they don't know how. They don't know how to change. And sure, the unicorns and the startups and that's a fascinating kind of bubble in a way. But the larger companies, the global systems that they work in, I find that a lot of these people there's a culture of fear, right? There's a culture of fear of making the wrong mistake, doing things wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't be creative because, creativity means trying things, doing something different, making mistakes, and they can't. And so they don't know any better, and even though they might agree with you, they just simply don't know how to do it. So where do we start helping them? And I think, one of the things, and I think that's what you're talking about as well, is that you give them a different option. You show them another path. And and a different language, which I think is important because words make things kind of real.
Yep.
Because
Mhm.
there's a reality, it's language. And in a way, if you show them a different path and a different language, and you give them that sense of, oh, I can do this. This is okay, and actually, it feels okay. And you take these slow steps, because I think scale also means that you start small and then you scale, you try. But how do you feel that, or what is your experience in really helping people take that first step?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that so for me, it is a journey it's a learning journey of evolution, is the way that I would describe it. We run a number of programs for people, and we kind of see it in two ways. It's like one is the reset, and the other one is the doing. So I'm still I still have a mindset of a designer, but I have my heart is based in the concept of philosophically thinking about I think when I go back to, I could have gone to Johnny Johnson's house where he told the story about Auschwitz and kind of really just not been interested remotely about what it was, but it intrigued me, you know. So I have a huge, I really was fascinated by that. So I think you're absolutely right in that we have to give people a different way of looking at the world that feels sensible, realistic, relatable, one that they can embrace, maybe not without a little bit of trepidation, but nonetheless, it's something that really feels relatable to them and honest and authentic. And to your point, the language thing, I'm really obsessed by it. Having, albeit, I mean, my life started off as a visual designer,
Mm.
and but communication has always been a sort of a very core part of my life. The idea of how you write. There are people that write out there that have very, very important things to say, but they wrap it up in so much complexity and verbose language and very long paragraphs and sentences and all the rest of it, that kind of people just kind of go, I give up, because you're far more intelligent than I am. So, and I'm the complete opposite, which is, look, I really want to get this information to you, and I
Mhm.
want you to hold this information or this idea, this possibility, this mindset, this process, and you can own it. You can be the owner of those things. It's not about me at all. And with that language, then you can start to speak to other people. And I know that when I left the industries that I'd built my career on, a number of years ago, it was a really weird place to be, because what language do I use? Who do I
Mm.
trust? And I kind of really empathize with that. It's a bit like leaving a marriage. We've been together for 24 years. We're now splitting up. I never really thought about, having a relationship. I want to be in a relationship. How do I do those things? So I think that really helping people with that journey, even out of a practice of inquiry and curiosity, with a little bit of structure in it. So we take people from the question of what is beauty, with quite a lot of input in terms of helping them sort of think about that, to the idea that, were you to design a business that was more beautiful, what would that look like? At the end of it, what I'm hoping is that the the individual has gone on their own personal journey of transformation. They're thinking about their team, if they have one, that would go on a journey of transformation. They're thinking now about business not as sustainable, but as a regenerative, and feel that actually they've got some courage and some knowledge to help them map that out in terms of what that might look like.
I also think that you are a great storyteller. So I think the way you communicate is through stories and relatable stories, right? So I will never forget that story of you sitting in your room imagining dead
Yeah.
bodies piling up, right? No, but I won't.
Yeah.
I won't. I will never forget those stories because that's such a wonderful gift if you can share and communicate and share wisdom and ideas and philosophies through stories. I think that's also really the power of language. Really, if it's if it's kind of in
But
used for storytelling, it's very powerful.
yeah, yeah, and if I may say that, I mean, the reality is that we are metaphysical animals, as a species. So the storytelling is, no one comes into a pub on a Friday night, gets their laptop out, and gives you a PowerPoint presentation of their week.
Would be very funny though.
Not
They
any of
would
my friends.
they would say, "You'd never guess what's happened to me today," or "You never guess what's happened to this week." So it's all
Mhm.
about storytelling,
Exactly.
and we can use that. Some people kind of like roll their eyes and go, yeah, blah blah blah, but it's absolutely true, and it's the threads that construct worlds in terms of how we see things. And I said, the story then is the narrative frame, and what is held in a narrative frame is what people see. So if we think about
Mm.
what's happening, say, in the United States at the moment, with the presidential election, two very different stories of the potential of what the USA might look like. And I think that that is very, very important to people to really understand and to see. And personally, for me, I think that, Mr. T is telling a lot of porky pies, as we would say in English.
Whoppers. Yeah.
They're fragrant for lies. But people want to believe
Mhm.
that this idea of, and of course it's multi-layered. There's a lot of people that feel that they've been left behind. The American dream is not the dream. There is not social mobility. It's a stagnated, economy in many places where people are very stuck,
Mhm.
through the demise of some of their great, economic engines are making steel manufacture, whatever. A lot of things have been out offshored, and these people hurt, and of course they hurt, and I feel for them, because if you wake up every morning, with a knot in your gut about how do I pay the rent, how do I pay, the electricity, whatever, and someone's coming along and they're telling you that they're going to make America great again, and he's touching on all of the tropes of narrative which are making these people, feel the way that they do. And it's the same in all sorts of other,
Yeah.
places around the world, so it's not just in one place, but there's many. And we have it in England as well. There's no doubt about it. It's very easy to point the finger. If you're a victim, you need to find, someone that's doing bad things to you. And, immigration seems to be the popular topic of choice at this moment in time. And so the skillful orator, writer, narrator, if they can change that that conversation and get other things into that frame of what hope means and what optimism means, what the potential is. I mean, the idea is that I can't remember, so I'm just going to grab this out of the air, but I mean, I think that there are trillions of dollars that could be made by turning us into a real green economy. So the folks that were down the mines, the folks that were in, extractive economies in one form or another, industries, we're now creating, industries which are regenerative, whether obviously that will be through energy, particularly, or where we are thinking about cars or aviation, or, thinking really differently about an economy in a way which is really regenerative, actually could be supplying a whole set of jobs. And this conversation has come up and come down over, many years, but like in, let's say, the beginning of our century, if you said that there would be people that would be working in what we call IT and tech
Mm.
and silicon chip manufacturer, or whatever, those jobs didn't exist. There was no money for those things.
Mhm.
So to me, then it's about shaping the narrative of the conversation of where actually we think that our society or our economies could be, were we to really look about them, thinking about them as being truly beautiful, go truly regenerative, and actually creating something very different for a future that we could look at, that we would feel very optimistic about. I mean, I was born in 1964. Obviously, I don't remember much about the 60s because I was a kid. So the 70s was kind of more my time. But when you go back and you look at the music of the 60s
Mhm.
globally, from a Western perspective anyway, or you look at documentaries made about the time, if you look about what was being done in terms of infrastructure, house building, whatever, there was this incredible sense of optimism.
Mm.
It was almost like within the DNA. And we live in a moment which is very dystopian, I feel. It feels very, I never thought at my age I would look at a world that would feel as dark and as dangerous as the one we've got.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's that said, I think that there are, the generation below us, or below me anyway, they are steeped in values. They know that maybe they'll never own a house, they won't have a job for life, they won't have a pension, but actually they really think about the planet, and they really think about a world that they could make better than the one that they currently have, you know. And I think that that is I know from through the work that we've been doing, that's a global force of people
Mm.
that you won't see on the front pages again or the back pages of any right-wing press, because they want to hold a particular type of narrative. But these people want a different, want a better world. And even if you think about migration in that sense, these folks, these folks risk everything because they believe that actually they might be safe, and they might be able to contribute to something of a better life than the one that they would had if they'd stayed behind, and that's how I feel about that.
So I have two kids, and my son he's still 12 years old, and every day we watch. So in the Netherlands we have this kids news.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
we
good
watch
for
that.
learning Dutch as well, which is what I
Oh,
watch
that's
sometimes. Yes.
all right. Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that. And anyway, so basically they do cover all the world events really, and every day there's an item about a flood somewhere. There's a flood and there's war. There's a war, obviously. There's a couple of wars going on. There's war and floods, and every day. And so if I think about the way I grew up, I mean, I'm from 68. So I actually also kind of the 70s and specifically also the 80s were my no my childhood. But I I remember growing up in a time where we had the Soviet Union as a threat, sort of like, the bombs,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
the thing. And then I also remember the wall coming down.
Mm,
Very, I mean, that was, what was I, 20 something. And, but this idea that things would slowly get better,
mm,
right? Everything would get better, slowly get better. And then I see my kid watching that news with the floods and the war and the things and Putin and, and I can think, oh, it's not a given. We really have to work at it. It's not something we can just say like, oh no, that's evolution. Evolution makes, that means that everything slowly gets better for us as people. It's not. We have to design the future. We have to create it. And I'm kind of positive when I think about at least my kids
mm.
and their friends, and because they're really aware of this something's happening.
I think what you said is very important, and this idea that we can design the future. I'd say that everything man-made in this world is designed.
Mm.
Mm.
At one point, it doesn't exist. We sit there and we kind of go, wouldn't it be nice if we had some heat around here? So it kind of goes, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we need to make some fire. It's like, that's obviously, I don't know, there's a bush burning over there, or what if we were really able to, like, so I think that, we are extraordinary on that level in terms of our tool making, and designing the future, Arnie, I think is absolutely right. And I think that, giving people that potential of the possibility that you can make a difference,
Mhm.
which we were talking much earlier in the conversation, I think is so important. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if you had, so we have a newsletter called Living Beautifully, and we used to put it out once a month. It's a little bit more sporadic than that these days. But I like to sit down and I talk about beautiful conversations, beautifully made, beautifully built, restorative food, insights, books, leadership, whatever. I'm trying to show through this curation of this information that actually there are some amazing things going on, and some of them is like, there's a particular film I found, which was a company. It was based in the States. I can't remember where it was, whether it was in Los Angeles or somewhere else, but they hand roll Cuban cigars, right? So smoking's really bad for you, right? Shouldn't smoke. But this film was so fantastic in terms of the community that they built around guys being able to come together and have a smoke and have a conversation, and it kind of really built something. And to me, that's also something very, very beautiful, as well as, you could say someone working on a very regenerative manufacturing enterprise where, they're taking fishing nets out of the sea, they're paying indigenous communities to do that. That gives them money, which they would never normally had, whatever. And so that idea of sharing the concept of beauty is something which is, vast and wonderful, is one I'm really keen to share with people, to say that, there are so many. So in a way, it's just like a form of inspiration of, we can dream to design the world better than the one we currently have, and it doesn't have to exist in this one place. And art plays a very big role in my life. And so we need to have artists,
Mm.
talking about, the world that we're in, the world that we're living in. How do we critique that? What do we talk about? I'm really keen about that. Architecture to me is very important. I was born in Letchworth Garden City, which was the first garden city in the world. I had the first roundabout in the world. And again, maybe not many people would have been born in Letchworth and really thought about its heritage and all the rest of it, but I did. And so I think a lot about urban environments and the quality of life that maybe people would have if you, just design things in a way where it's a good place for people to want to be in and live in and, move about in, and all the rest of it. That should be beautiful, which means then there's a quality of life and experience that you're having in those places and spaces.
Thank you. I have a hard time ending this conversation because
We always
uh,
do.
because I know, but I love listening to you and what you're saying, because it's very inspirational, and lots of stuff is going on in my head. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
same.
yeah, this is so cool. I think it's a wonderful approach. I think that's very inspirational. The approach of beauty. I like that. So I think I'm gonna think
Yeah.
about that for
And
a
I
very long time.
and I love that it's not just, of course, it's not just the aesthetics of something, but it's
Mm,
way more than that. And it doesn't only apply to things we design. It can also apply to us and our soul. It can also apply to how we live our life. It's much bigger than just what we design. It's
Yeah.
it's really cool.
And creative leadership, sort of our kind of, our search for what that means, and just going to create a language around that. I think what you're saying, and you as a person, basically, I think you are that kind of creative leader, in the sense that to us, creative leaders create options that we didn't even know was possible, create sort of alternatives and say, yeah, but you can also talk about it this way, or look at it from this angle, or hey, there's another path. And then other people are like, oh, I didn't even know that was possible, or allowed even, or you give permission to people.
Permission. I think permission is a very important word.
Yeah.
Giving people permission, I think, is very, very important. Sorry, I used that word too much, important, but I think it is important. Just to give someone that sense that that is an option for them, and we are prisoners, all of us, around our own perceptions of what we are and what we could become, or what has happened to us, which then kind of relates to these sorts of things. And then you give someone permission to explore the potential of what an alternative perspective might look like. Exactly. And it's freedom for a lot of people. Yes. I always remember when I was very poorly and I was having therapy, and this lady said to me, she said, when do you start work? And I said, well, I start work at 8 a.m. And she said, and when do you stop? And I said, well, about 8 p.m. And she said, what do you do between 8 and 8? And I said, well, I work. That's what I do. That's, as she said, but you live in the countryside, don't you? Which I did. And I said, I do. She said, you could go for a walk. It was a bit like saying, do you know when you thought the earth was flat? It's actually round. Go for it. And it was an extraordinary moment. And we just acquired a dog. He's no longer with us, sadly, Piper. But so Pipey and I would then go on 2 to 3 hour walks during the day. And it was just, the most liberating experience. And, I ended up having my best friend for life. And also on these walks, you got to think about the world in a very different type of way, so there was an incredible form of liberation. So sometimes the doors to perception only just need to be opened a little bit, or you just need to shift the axis of perception in a way where you're really helping people to see the world in a very different type of way, and the potential that they've got to play a role in that. And to me, that's then both exciting and very energizing to help people go on that journey.
Yes, I can imagine, and I think you're doing an amazing job. So opening the door, one of the doors of perception to us, that was, thank you so much for doing that. And so thanks for being on the podcast. I think we really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's really shifted how I think about beauty. Yeah.
Well, lovely to meet you both. I very much enjoyed it.